What's up guys, TCG Guide here, and today we're going to be looking at a modern version of a deck that I actually ran during Shadows over Innistrad Standard. That's right, Black-Red Vampire Madness. Since this is a very creature-heavy aggro deck, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the creatures first. And first up for the creatures, we have Asylum Visitor. 2-cost 3/1 with Madness. Its draw ability is extremely relevant in the mid to late game because you're going to find yourself with an empty hand more often than not. Next up is Bloodghast. Not exactly a madness creature, but this card is always okay to discard because every time you play a land with its landfall ability, it's going to come back. And if your opponent has 10 or less life, it's going to have haste for an added bonus. Next is Bloodhall Priest. Like I said before, you're going to rely on top deck a lot with this deck. And Bloodhall Priest is another card ready to take full advantage of that. Add on that it can be cast for just 3 with her madness if you discard her. A 3-cost 4/4 that does extra damage when entering the battlefield and when attacking? Yes please. Next is Drana, Liberator of Malakir. Now Drana can be an absolute powerhouse. Costing only 1 generic and double black, a 2/3 flyer with first strike is already pretty good. But where she really shines is with her ability. When she deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. Next is Falkenrath Gorger. Now this is something you always like to see in your opening hand. 1-cost 1/1 that gives all your vampires madness. This card by itself sets you up for any madness enabler you have. Anything that requires you to discard, Falkenrath Gorger is there to take advantage of, so that you can discard any of your creatures on top of whatever spells that you had with madness in your hand. Furyblade Vampire is our first madness enabler, and not a bad one at that. 2-cost 2/1 that lets you discard at the beginning of combat to give it +3/+0. Pretty good. Heir of Falkenrath is next. We're only running it as a 3 of, and this card is basically an easier to flip Delver, but you have to wait till turn 2 to cast it. Also a great madness enabler for a potential turn 3 attack for 7. And this is the other half of the 1-2 combo for 7 that I just mentioned. Incorrigible Youths. The idea here is to play Heir of Falkenrath on turn 2, then discard Incorrigible Youths and cast it for its madness. Now you have a 3/2 flyer and a 4/3 with haste. Enjoy. But seriously, this card's most likely going to be something used for a late game push most of the time. And Olivia, Mobilized for War, is going to be the card to let you do that. If you manage to save up a few cards in hand late game, Olivia really sets herself up for one hell of a final push. If you have the mana and creatures to drop, you can play Falkenrath Gorger for 1, then discard any of your other vampires and start casting them with madness, giving them a buff and haste in the process. Ideally, you'd like to finish by discarding a spell with madness for added effect, and so all your creatures can attack. Realistically though, the most you would really expect to get out of it is 2 or 3 creatures this way. Stromkirk Captain was a staple in vampire decks back in the Innistrad block, and it's easy to see why. A 3-cost 2/2 body with first strike that buffs all your other vampires and gives them all first strike. Talk about value. Now this card does weaken Drana a little bit by making her ability trigger at the same time as your other creatures doing damage. It's not ideal for her. Now we've got Stromkirk Condemned. Not a whole lot to say about this one. 2 black for this 2/2 madness enabler that buffs all your vampires for the cost of a discarded card. You can only use this ability once each turn, but that's usually all you need. Next up is Vampire Lacerator. This is one you really want to save for that final push I mentioned with Olivia. You want to be sure you have a Falkenrath Gorger out when you do, to have him be a 3/3 for 1 that if you have Drana out is hitting for 4 on his first turn. This card is ridiculous if used right. Voldaren Pariah is our last creature, and boy is this one powerful. You never want to hardcast this. If you do, you'll be waiting forever and wasting mana. With a madness cost of 3 black, a 3/3 flyer isn't great, but when you sacrifice 3 creatures and it becomes Abolisher of Bloodlines, now we're talking. Now a 6/5 flyer, and just for transforming, your opponent has to sacrifice 3 creatures. GG. Is it just me or does this card have a lot of 3s? On to the spells, not very many with creatures filling 31 spots in the deck. This is an aggro deck after all. First we've got 2 Fiery Temper. This card was praised in Standard for being a lightning bolt with madness. Another card that you don't want to pay the full price for. 1 red mana for 3 damage sounds much better to me. So just wait and you'll know the right time to play this beauty. Next is Vampiric Fury, one of the only 2 non-creature spells in the deck without madness. This card is pretty straightforward, a nice little combat trick to give your vampires +2/+0 on first strike. Your opponent won't see this one coming. Alms of the Veins we're running as a 2 of, very similar to Fiery Temper, but you're going to be gaining 3 life in the process. Distemper of the Blood is just a really good card to finish off your play with Olivia. It can be useful at other times, but you'll get the most value this way. And the only enchantment in the deck, Stensia Masquerade. It does weaken Drana in the sense that it gives all your vampires first strike, but it starts giving out +1/+1 counters in return. And Neglected Heirloom is the only artifact in the deck, and it's a 1-of because it's basically only really useful with Heir of Falkenrath and Voldaren Pariah at first. If you have it equipped when you transform one of them, you transform Neglected Heirloom into Ashmouth Blade, and it becomes a 3/3 first strike buff to one of your creatures, and it can really change the game in your favor. The mana base for this is pretty typical of a red-black deck in Modern, with just a few twists. You're going to run 4 Bloodstained Mire as your fetch lands. We've got 4 Blood Crypt, which is your standard shock land fetch. Cavern of Souls is an obvious include for a tribal deck. Dragonskull Summit, as long as this card isn't in your opening hand, it's going to be coming into play untapped. Foreboding Ruins is on the other end of the spectrum here. You actually want this one in your opening hand, or at least when you've got another mountain or swamp in your hand that you can reveal. And Gaia Reach Sanitarium, colorless legendary land that draws a card and is a madness enabler. This card just makes sense here. And to finish things off, we've got 5 swamps. Next we're going to have a look at the sideboard, and you might notice that there are 15 red cards in the main deck, and that's for game 2 when you completely change things up on your opponent and turn it into a mono black tribal. I know, crazy, right? It actually works more often than you'd think, but this was Modern Black-Red Vampire Madness. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did and feel like using this deck, go ahead and leave a like, and I hope you guys have a great day.